Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and in this video we are going to be bringing you a really cool aquatic inhabitant, and that is the Blue Dream Shrimp, Neocaridina shrimp. It is an awesome shrimp. Hope you enjoy the video. Appreciate you being here. So welcome to our 40-gallon breeder. This is one of the tanks that houses some of our Blue Dream shrimp in our fish room. We actually have 3 tanks that house this particular species of shrimp, because I think it's probably my favorite color of the Neocaridina shrimp. These are absolutely fantastic shrimp. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Their size, they're gonna get to max out around an inch or an inch and a half or so. The females generally get a little bit larger, show a little bit more color, and so you have to be careful there when you're looking at shrimp, especially later on when we talk about breeding them. If you start removing shrimp that are less colorful, sometimes you wind up removing some of the males, and that may not be a good thing, but more on that later. Temperament, they're awesome. They're really peaceful, and so a lot of people like to keep shrimp in a tank that is a very peaceful tank. You just have to make sure that you manage the tank mates properly. And so this is one of the most common questions we get is, what can I keep with my shrimp? And the general rule of thumb is, if the shrimp can fit in a fish's mouth, most likely it will become fish food. Now, what you're going to see throughout this video is, while the adults can be an inch or an inch and a half, the shrimplets are extremely tiny. In fact, when they are first born, they are even very difficult to see, and so that can make the tank mates a little bit interesting. If you're interested in breeding shrimp, I would highly recommend having a shrimp and maybe a shrimp and snail tank only. If you're just looking to add them to a community setting, then we need to make sure that our inhabitants are also very small. By the way, if you are looking for Blue Dream shrimp, the place to go, we have a channel sponsor, Flip Aquatics, flipaquatics.com. I will put their information down in the description below, but that would definitely be a great place to go to check out shrimp, especially the Blue Dream. They have a great line. Again, they are a channel sponsor and have some really nice looking shrimp. So what are some potentially good options, tank mates for your shrimp? Mystery snails can work, nearite snails, ram's horn snails. Those are all good options, and snails and shrimp tend to complement each other fairly well in a tank. If you're looking for fish, you generally want to stay on the very small side, so things like celestial pearl danios. Rasboras can work, things like chili rasboras, exclamation point rasboras, mirror rasboras. You just want to make sure the rasboras you're getting are small, that they're not going to really top out at much more than an inch, and that's going to give you maximum shrimplet survival. Other fish, you might be able to keep your shrimp with the fleur-de-lis killifish, which is a very tiny fish. We've had some luck keeping our shrimp with bristlenose plecos, although I suspect that some of the shrimplets go missing sometimes, but for the most part, that combination has worked out relatively well. Again, the key here is you want to make sure the fish that you're buying can't eat the shrimp babies if you're interested in breeding them. And so even things like endlers and certainly guppies, those will usually prey on shrimp. We get a question a lot about bettas. I personally think mixing bettas and Neocaridina shrimp is probably a bad idea, just because the bettas are big enough where they can even potentially eat some of the juvenile shrimp that you might have in your tank. Now, when it comes to the water parameters, we've got a little bit of leeway here when it comes to the Neocaridina. Temperatures, you can go down to the mid 60s. We actually keep our tanks in the upper 70s. Sometimes they even approach 80. Their best temperature is probably somewhere in the low 70s, so let's just say 68 to maybe 74, but you can go a little bit lower, a little bit higher. What's going to happen as you increase the temperature of the tank, their life cycle tends to speed up, so they might not live as long. Certainly you're going to get faster shrimplet development, but that's going to come at a cost of life expectancy when you're starting to approach those upper 70s and close to 80 degrees. pH, again, we've got a pretty decent pH range, somewhere around 7. Our fish room is right around a pH of 8 or so, and they're still breeding and thriving in that water. But ideally, you're probably looking at between 7 and 7.5. Water hardness, fairly average with these guys, somewhere between 5 to 10 degrees hardness on both your GH and KH should work out just fine. You just want to make sure when you're adding shrimp, ideally you want to add them to a cycled tank, and that tank has been established for a little while, just so they have something to pick through. Maybe some biofilms have already formed, maybe a little bit of algae is already present in the tank. When it comes to food, they're not particularly picky. I have found them to be very good at eating green hair algae. So if you have a tank with green hair algae, Certainly the Neocaridina shrimp could potentially help with that, but you do want to feed them as well. So they will eat uneaten food. So if you've got other inhabitants in the tank, so flake foods, like we feed all of our fish North Fin flake foods and micro pellets, and we will actually put those foods in this tank as well for the shrimp. Shrimp specialty foods can be nice because they can add back some of the minerals that they need to form their exoskeleton. So things like shrimp snowflakes or the shrimp lollies, those can be really good. They love rapashi, that gel food, especially the community blend, and some of the algae-based blends can be really good for them. Every once in a while, especially if you got plecos in there, we'll put in a piece of cucumber and we'll see them munching on that as well. When it comes to tank size, a 5 gallon is probably a good rule of thumb for a minimum tank size. And the reason for that is the larger the tank you have, the easier it's going to be to manage water parameters. And so even with a 5 gallon in shrimp, they don't like drastic changes in pH or water hardness or temperature. So you really just want to make sure whatever tank you have, you can manage the water parameters well. And again, 5 gallons and above, but obviously if you go larger, 10, 20 gallons, you're going to be better off. Again, you're looking at a 40 gallon breeder here. Most of our shrimp breeding tanks don't go less than a 20 gallon. So what should you put in your shrimp tank? Well, you can see here, we've got some live plants. In this particular tank, we've got some jungle val growing everywhere. We have some hornwort. We have a little bit of guppy grass in this tank as well. Probably some of the better plants to keep with your shrimp would be hornwort, guppy grass, maybe some water sprite or water wisteria. These are plants that tend to grow fairly quickly. They're easy to keep for the most part, and the shrimp love that extra surface area to kind of pick on, as you can see throughout this video, and pick off the biofilms and the bacteria and things that are growing on those plants. So that is always a great idea. Other ideas would be definitely sand. With this particular type of shrimp, the Blue Dream, a darker sand might actually be better in terms of getting out that darker coloration. The downside to that is if you've got dark substrate with a dark shrimp, you're not going to see them as easily sometimes. And so this has worked out fine, but sand, I find when it comes to shrimp, is a must, not so much because they absolutely require it. It's just when you're feeding shrimp, if that food sinks into gravel, it becomes very difficult to remove, especially if you have a lot of shrimp and you're worried about sucking them up and you don't want to do a gravel vac. What can often happen is you wind up with some detritus worms, and that can cause some issues later on. So I just find it's a much easier thing to do is to keep them on sand. Driftwood can be nice. Again, it gives them a little bit of surface area to kind of pick through. Catappa leaves are great. Cholla wood is another great addition. But that generally, the way you see the tank here is pretty much the way we keep a lot of our shrimp tanks. Something else to consider when you are setting up your shrimp tank is filtration. We run sponge filters in the vast majority of our shrimp tanks. If you're going to be running a hang-on back filter or a canister filter, just make sure you have a pre-filter, an intake sponge on that intake so that your shrimp and certainly the shrimplets don't get sucked up into the filter. When it comes to breeding, you just need a male and a female, and as long as you've got the right water parameters, typically they will do the rest. It might take 3 to 5 months in terms of from the time they're born until the time they're adults before they're going to start breeding. But when they do, you will see the females holding eggs under her body, and we've seen that a couple times already throughout this video. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks for the eggs to hatch. Again, the rate at which they will hatch depends upon the temperature. If the temperatures are cooler, it might take a little bit longer. If the temperatures are running in the upper 70s, it will take a shorter period of time. Again, the shrimplets are absolutely tiny, and so that's something to keep in mind. They can even be difficult to see, and so if you're doing tank maintenance, you've got a gravel vac in there, you're doing water changes, just be careful, because once your shrimp start to breed, it's really easy to suck up those little tiny shrimplets. There really isn't any parental care when it comes to shrimp having their little shrimplets. The fry are really easy to care for because you can pretty much feed them what you would feed the adults, and they will usually do just fine with that. But these are fantastic Neocaridina shrimp. Again, if you're looking for high quality shrimp, check out flipaquatics.com. This is definitely one of my favorite strains in the fish room, which is why we have 3 fish tanks with them going. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.